Hey guys, and welcome back to another reading of Harry Potter. We are on book 2 and we're getting ready to start chapter 6. We're going to meet a very interesting character. Well, I guess we kind of met him a little bit. We're going to get to know a very interesting character today. The chapter 6 is titled Gilderoy, Lockhart. Okay. And this will take about 22 minutes and we should be able to get through it. Alright, here we go, guys. The next day, however, Harry barely grinned once. Things started to go downhill from breakfast in the Great Hall. The 4 long house tables were laden with tureens of porridge, plates of kippers, mountains of toast, and dishes of eggs and bacon, beneath the enchanted ceiling. Today, a dull, cloudy gray. Harry and Ron sat down at the Gryffindor table next to Hermione, who had a copy of Voyages with Vampires propped open against the milk jug. There was a slight stiffness in the way she said, "Morning," which told Harry she was still disapproving of the way they had arrived. Neville Longbottom, on the other hand, had greeted them cheerfully. Neville was a round-faced and ancient prone boy with the worst memory of anyone Harry had ever met. "Mail's due any minute. I think Gran's sending a few things I forgot." Harry had just started his porridge when, sure enough, there was a rushing sound overhead and a hundred or so owls streamed in, circling the hall and dropping letters and packages into a chattering crowd. A big lumpy package bounced off Neville's head, and a second ladder, something large and gray, fell on Hermione's jug, spraying them all with milk and feathers. "Errol," said Ron, pulling the bedraggled owl out by the feet. Errol slumped unconscious on the side of the table, his legs in the air, and a damp red envelope on its beak. "Oh no," Ron gasped. "It's all right, he's still alive," said Hermione, prodding Errol gently with the tip of her finger. "It's not that. It's that." Ron was pointing to the red envelope. It looked quite ordinary to Harry, but Ron and Neville were both looking at it as though they expected for it to explode. "What's the matter?" said Harry. She sent me a howler," said Ron faintly. "You better open it, Ron," said Neville in a timid whisper. "It'll be worse if you don't. My gran sent me one once, and I ignored it," and he gulped. "It was horrible." Harry looked from their petrified faces to the red envelope. "What's a howler?" he said, but Ron's whole attention was fixed on the letter, which had begun to smoke at the corners. "Open it," Neville urged. "It'll be over in a few minutes." Ron stretched out a shaking hand and eased the envelope from Errol's beak and slid it open. Neville stuffed his fingers in his ears. A split second later, Harry knew why. He thought for a moment it had exploded. A roar of sound filled the huge hall, shaking dust from the ceilings. "Stealing the car? I wouldn't have been surprised if they expelled you. You wait till I get a hold of you. I don't suppose you stopped to think what your father and I went through when we saw it was gone." Mrs. Weasley's yells, 100 times louder than usual, made the plates and spoons rattle on the table and echo deafening off the stone walls. People throughout the hall were swiveling around to see who had received the howler, and Ron sank so low in his chair that only his crimson forehead could be seen. "Letter from Dumbledore last night. I thought your father would die of shame. We didn't bring you up to behave like this. You and Harry could have both died." Harry had been wondering when his name was going to crop up. He tried very hard to look as though he couldn't hear the voice that was making his eardrums throb. "Absolutely disgusted. Your father's facing an inquiry at work. It's entirely your fault, and if you put another toe out of line, we'll bring you straight back home." A ringing spell silence. The red envelope, which had dropped from Ron's hand, burst into flames and curled into ashes. Harry and Ron sat stunned, as though a tidal wave had just passed over them. A few people laughed, and gradually a babble of talk broke out again. Hermione closed Voyages with Vampires and looked down at the top of Ron's head. "Well, I don't know what you expected, Ron. Don't you tell me I deserved it," snapped Ron. Harry pushed his porridge away. His insides were burning with guilt. Mr. Weasley was facing an inquiry at work. After all, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had done for him over the summer, but he had no time to dwell on this. Professor McGonagall was moving along the Gryffindor table, handing out course schedules. Harry took it and saw that they had doubled Herbology with the Hufflepuffs first. Harry, Ron, and Hermione left the castle together. They crossed the vegetable patch and made for the greenhouses, where the magical plants were kept. At least the howler had done one good thing. Hermione seemed to think they had now been punished enough and was being perfectly friendly again. As they neared the greenhouse, they saw the rest of the class standing outside, waiting for Professor Sprout. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had just only joined them when she came striding across in the lawn, accompanied by Gilderoy Lockhart. Professor Sprout's arms were full of bandages, and with another twinge of guilt, Harry spotted the whomping willow in the distance, several of its branches now in slings. Professor Sprout was a squat little witch who wore a patched hat over her flyaway hair. There was usually a large amount of earth on her clothes, and her fingernails would have made Aunt Petunia faint. Gilderoy Lockhart, however, was immaculate, in the sweeping rose of turquoise, his golden hair shining under a perfectly positioned turquoise hat with gold trimming. "Oh, hello there," he called, beaming around at the assembled students. "Just been showing Professor Sprout the right way to doctor a whomping willow, but I don't want you running away with the idea that I'm better at herbology than she is. I just happened to met several of these exotic plants on my travels." "Greenhouse 3 today, chaps," said Professor Sprout, who was looking distantly disgruntled, not at all her usual cheerful self. There was a murmur of interest. They had only ever worked in the greenhouse once before. Worked in Greenhouse 1 before. Greenhouse 3 housed far more interesting and dangerous plants. Professor Sprout took a large key from her belt and unlocked the door. Harry caught a whiff of damp earth and fertilizer mingling with the heavy perfumes of giant umbrella-sized flowers dangling from the ceiling. He was about to follow Ron and Hermione from inside when Lockhart's hand shot out. "Harry, I've been wanting a word with you. Don't you mind if he's a couple minutes late? You don't mind, do you, Professor Sprout?" Judging by Professor Sprout's scowl, she did mind, but Lockhart said, "That's the ticket," and closed the greenhouse door in her face. "Harry," said Lockhart, his large white teeth gleaming in the sunlight as he shook his head. Harry, Harry, Harry. Completely nonplussed, Harry said nothing. "When I heard, well, of course, it was my fault. I could have kicked myself." Harry had no idea what he was talking about. He was about to say so when Lockhart went on, "I don't know when I've been more shocked. Flying a car to Hogwarts? Well, of course, I knew at once why you'd done it. Stood out a mile, Harry. Harry, Harry, Harry." It was remarkable how he could show every one of those brilliant teeth, even when he wasn't talking. "Gave you a taste of publicity, didn't I?" said Lockhart. "Gave you the bug. I got you out in the front page of the paper, and you couldn't wait to do it again." "Oh no, Professor, see..." "Harry, Harry, Harry," said Lockhart, reaching out and grasping his shoulder. "I understand. Natural. You want a bit more once you've had that first taste. And I blame myself for giving you that, because it was bound to get you ahead. But you see here, young man, you can't start flying to cars and getting yourself noticed. Just calm down, all right? There's plenty of time for that when you're older. Yes, I know what you're thinking. It's all right for him. He's an internationally famous wizard already. But when I was 12, I was just as much a nobody as you are now. In fact, I would say I was even more of a nobody. I mean, few people have even heard of you, haven't they? All that business with he who must not be named." He glanced at the lightning scar on Harry's forehead. I know. It's not quite as good as winning the Witches' Weekly, a Most Charming Smile Award 5 times in a row, as I have. But it's a start. Harry, it's a start." He gave Harry a hearty wink and strode off. Harry stood stunned for a few seconds and then remembered he was supposed to be at the greenhouse. He opened the door and slid inside. Professor Sprout was standing behind a trestle bench in the center of the greenhouse. About 20 pairs of different colored earmuffs were lying on the bench. When Harry had taken his place between Ron and Hermione, she said, "We'll be repotting mandrakes today. Now, who can tell me the properties of a mandrake?" To nobody's surprise, Hermione's hand was the first in the air. "Mandrake, or mandrogia, is a powerful restorative," said Hermione, sounding as usual, as though she'd always swallowed the textbook. "It's used to return people who have been transfigured or cursed to their original state." "Excellent. 10 points to Gryffindor," said Professor Sprout. "The mandrake forms an essential part of the most antidotes. It's also, however, dangerous. Who can tell me why?" Hermione's hand narrowly missed Harry's glasses as it shot up again. "The cry of the mandrake is fatal to anyone who hears it," she said promptly. "Precisely. Take another 10 points," said Professor Sprout. "Now, the mandrake we have here are all still very young." She pointed to a row of deep trays as she spoke, and everyone shuffled forward for a better look. 100 or so tufty little plants, purplish green in color, were growing in rows. They looked quite unremarkable to Harry, who didn't have the slightest idea what Hermione meant by the cry of the mandrake. "Everyone take a pair of earmuffs," said the Professor Sprout. There was a scramble as everyone tried to seize a pair that wasn't pink and fluffy. "When I tell you to put them on, you make sure your ears are completely covered," said Professor Sprout. "When it's safe to remove them, I will give you the thumbs up." "Right. Earmuffs on." Harry snapped his earmuffs over his ears. They shut out the sound completely. Professor Sprout put the pink fluffy pair on her own ears, rolled up the sleeves of her robes, and grasped one of the tufty plants firmly and pulled hard. Harry let out a gasp of surprise that no one could hear. Instead of roots, a small, muddy, and extremely ugly baby popped out of the earth. The leaves were growing right out of his head. He had pale green molded skin and was clearly bawling at the top of his lungs. Professor Sprout took a large plant pot from under the table and plunged the mandrake into it, burying him in the dark, deep compost until the tufted leaves were visible. Professor Sprout dusted off her hands and gave them the thumbs up, and they removed their own earmuffs. "As our mandrakes are only seedlings, their cries won't kill yet," she said calmly, as though she'd done nothing more exciting than water her begonia. "However, they will knock you out for several hours, as I'm sure none of you want to miss your first day back, so make sure your earmuffs are securely in place when you work. I will attract your attention when it's time to pack up. Forward to a tray. There's a large supply of pots here, compost and socks over there, and be careful of the venomous..." It's like Dracula with a tent. Tentacola? I should probably get like a Harry Potter words that aren't real book that helps me pronunciate these words. Tentacola? Maybe that's the last time we'll hear that. "It's teething." She gave a sharp slap to a spiky dark red plant as she spoke, making it draw the longest feelers that had been inching sneakily over her shoulder. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were joined at the tray by a curly-haired Hufflepuff boy Harry knew just by sight but had never spoken to. "Justin Finch Fletchley," he said, brightly, shaking Harry by the hand. "Know who you are, of course, the famous Harry Potter. And you're Hermione Granger, always top of everything." Hermione beamed as she had her hand shaken too. "And Ron Weasley. Wasn't that your flying car?" Ron didn't smile. The howler, however, was obviously still on his mind. "The Lockhart's something, he said, isn't he?" said Justin happily as he began filling their plant pots with dragon dung compost. "Awfully brave chap. Have you read his books? I'd have died in fear if I'd been cornered in a telephone booth by a werewolf, but he just stayed cool and zap, just fantastic. My name was down for Eton, you know. I can tell you how glad I am I came here. Of course, Mother was slightly disappointed, but since I made her read Lockhart's books, I think she began to see how useful it would be to have a fully trained wizard in the family." After that, they didn't much have a chance to talk. Their earmuffs were back on, and they needed to concentrate on the mandrakes. Professor Sprout had made it look extremely easy, but it wasn't. The mandrakes didn't like coming out of the earth, but didn't seem to want to go back in them either. They squirmed and kicked and flailed their sharp little fists and gnashed their teeth. Harry spent the whole 10 whole minutes trying to squash a particularly fat one into a pot. By the end of class, Harry, like everyone else, was sweaty and aching and covered in earth. Everyone traipsed back to the castle for a quick wash, and then the Gryffindors hurried off to Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall's classes were always very hard work, but today especially difficult. Everything Harry had learned last year seemed to have leaked out of his head during the summer. He was supposed to be turning a beetle into a button, but all he managed to do was give a beetle a lot of exercise as it scuttled over the desktop, avoiding his wand. Ron was having worse problems. He had patched up his wand with some borrowed Spello tape, but it seemed to be damaged beyond repair. It kept cracking and sparking at odd moments, and every time Ron tried to transfigure his beetle, it engulfed him in a thick gray smoke that smelled like rotten eggs. Unable to see what he was doing, Ron accidentally squashed his beetle with his elbow and had to ask for a new one. Professor McGonagall wasn't pleased. Harry was relieved to hear the lunch bell. His brain felt like a wrung sponge. Everyone filed out of the classroom except him and Ron, who was whacking his wand furiously on the desk. "Useless thing! Write home for another one," Harry suggested, as the wand let a volley of bangs like a firecracker. "Oh yeah, and get another howler back," said Ron, stuffing the now hissing wand into his bag. "It's your own fault your wand got snapped." They went down to lunch, where Ron's mood was not improved by Hermione showing them the handful of perfect coat buttons she produced in Transfiguration. What we've got this afternoon," said Harry, hastily changing the subject. "Defense against the dark arts," said Hermione at once. "Why?" demanded Ron, seizing her schedule. "Have you outlined all Lockhart's lessons in little hearts?" Hermione snapped the schedule back, blushing furiously. They finished lunch and went outside to the overcast courtyard. Hermione sat down on the stone step and buried her nose in Voyages with Vampires again. Harry and Ron stood talking about the Quidditch for several minutes before Harry became aware that he was being closely watched. Looking up, he saw a very small mousy-haired boy he'd seen trying on the Sorting Hat last night, staring at Harry as though transfixed. He was clutching what looked like an ordinary Muggle camera. At that moment, he looked right at him and went bright red. "All right, Harry, I'm Colin Creevey," he said breathlessly, taking a tentative step forward. "I'm in Gryffindor too. Do you think, would it be all right? Can I have your picture?" he said, raising the camera hopefully. "A picture?" Harry reported blankly. "So I can prove that I met you," said Colin Creevey, eagerly edging forward. "I know all about you. Everyone's told me about how you survived, when you know who tried to kill you, and how you disappeared and everything, and how you still got a lightning scar on your forehead." His eyes raked Harry's hairline. "And a boy in my dormitory said if I develop the film and the right potion, the picture will move." Colin drew a great shuddering breath of excitement and said, "It's amazing here, isn't it? I never knew all this odd stuff could do. I never knew all the odd stuff I could do was... let me start that over. I never knew all the odd stuff I could do was magic till I got the letter from Hogwarts. My dad's a milkman. He couldn't believe it either. So I'm taking loads of pictures to send home to him, and it'd be really good if I had one of you." He looked at Harry. "Maybe your friend could take it and I could stand next to you, and then you could sign it?" "Signed photos. You're giving out signed photos, Potter." Loud and scratching, Draco Malfoy's voice echoed around the courtyard. He had stopped right behind Colin, flanked as he always was at Hogwarts with his large and thuggish cronies, Crabbe and Goyle. "Everyone line up," Malfoy ordered to the crowd. "Harry Potter's giving out signed photos." "No, I'm not," said Harry angrily, his fist clenching. "Be quiet, Malfoy." "You're just jealous," piped in Colin, whose entire body was about as thick as Crabbe's neck. "Jealous?" said Malfoy, who didn't need to shout anymore. Half the courtyard was listening. "Of what? I don't want a foul scar right across my head, thanks. I don't think getting your head cut open makes you that special myself." Crabbe and Goyle were sniggering ridiculously. "Eating slugs, Malfoy?" said Ron angrily. Crabbe stopped laughing and started rubbing his knuckles in a menacing way. "Be careful, Weasley," sneered Malfoy. "You don't want to start trouble, or your mummy will have to come and take you away from school." He put on a shrill, piercing voice. If you put another toe out of line." A knot of slithering fifth years nearby laughed loudly at this. "Weasley would like a signed photo of Potter," smirked Malfoy. "It'd be worth more than his family's whole house." Ron whipped out his spell tape wand, but Hermione shut Voyages with Let's try that whole sentence over. Ron whipped out his spell tape wand, but Hermione shut Voyages with Vampires with a snap and whispered, "Look out!" What's all this? Gilderoy Lockhart was striding toward them with his turquoise robe swirling behind him. "Who's giving out signed photos?" Harry started to speak, but he was cut short as Lockhart flung an arm around his shoulders and thundered joyfully, "Shouldn't have asked. We meet again, Harry." Pinned to Lockhart's side, burning with humiliation, Harry saw Malfoy slide smirking back to the crowd. "Come on then, Mr. Creevey," said Lockhart, beaming to Colin. "A double portrait. Can't do better than that. We'll both sign it for you." Colin fumbled for his camera and took a picture as the bell rang behind them, signaling the start of the afternoon classes. "Off you go, move along there," Lockhart called to the crowd as he set off back to the castle with Harry, who was wishing he knew a good vanishing spell, still clasped to his side. "Words the wise, Harry," said Lockhart paternally as they entered the building through a side door. "I covered up for you back there with young Creevey. If he was photographing me, too, your schoolmates won't think you're setting yourself up so much." Deaf to Harry's stammers, Lockhart swept him down the corridor line with staring students up a staircase. "Let me just say that handing out signed pictures at this stage in your career, it isn't sensible. It looks a tad big-headed. Harry, to be frank, there may very well come a time when, like me, you'll need to keep a stack handy wherever you go. But," he gave a little nod, "I think you're not quite there yet." They had reached Lockhart's classroom, and he let Harry go at last. Harry yanked his robe straight, and he headed for the seat at the very back of class, where he busied himself with piling all of 7 Lockhart's books in front of him, so he could avoid looking at the real thing. The rest of the class came clattering in. Ron and Hermione sat down on either side of Harry. "You could have fried an egg on your face," said Ron. "You better hope Creevy doesn't meet Ginny, or they'll start a Harry Potter fan club." "Be quiet," snapped Harry. The last thing he needed was for Lockhart to hear the phrase Harry Potter fan club. When the whole class was seated, Lockhart cleared his throat loudly and silence fell. He reached forward, picked up Neville Longbottom's copy of Travels with Trolls, and held it up to show his own winking portrait on the front. "Me," he said, pointing to it and winking as well. "Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class honorary member of the Dark Forest Defense League, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. But I don't talk about that. I didn't get rid of the Bandin Banshee by smiling at her." He waited for the laugh. A few people smiled weakly. "I see you've all bought a complete set of my books. Well done. I thought we'd start today with a little quiz. Nothing to worry about, just a check-in to see how well you've read them, how much you've taken in." When he handed out the test papers and returned to the front of the class, he said, "You have 30 minutes. Start now." Harry Potter looked down at his paper and read, "What is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? What is Gilderoy Lockhart's secret ambition? What, in your opinion, is Gilderoy Lockhart's greatest achievement to date?" On it went, over 3 sides of paper, right down to 54. When is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday, and what would his ideal gift be? Half an hour later, Lockhart collected the papers and rifled through them in front of the class. "Tut, tut, tut. Hardly any of you remember that my favorite color is lilac. I say so in The Year with the Yeti, and a few of you need to read Wanderings with Werewolves more carefully. I clearly state in Chapter 12 that my ideal birthday gift would be harmony between all magic and all non-magic peoples, though I wouldn't say no to a large bottle of Odin's old fire whiskey." He gave them another wink. Ron was now staring at Lockhart with an expression of disbelief in his face. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, who were sitting in front, were shaking with silent laughter. Hermione, on the other hand, was listening to Lockhart with attention and gave a start when he mentioned her by name. "But Miss Hermione Granger, she knew my secret ambition was to rid the world of evil and market my own range of hair care potions. Good girl! In fact," he flipped the paper over, "full marks. Where is Miss Hermione Granger?" Hermione raised a trembling hand. "Excellent," beamed Lockhart. "Quite excellent. Take 10 points for Gryffindor." And so, to business, he bent down behind his desk and lifted a large covered cage onto it. "Now be warned. It's my job to arm you against the foulest creatures known to my wizard kind. You may find yourself facing your worst fears in this room. Know only that no harm can befall you whilst I'm here. All I ask is that you remain calm." In spite of himself, Harry leaned around his pile of books for a better look at the cage. Lockhart placed a hand on the cover. Dean and Seamus had stopped laughing now. Neville was cowering in the front row seat. "I must ask you not to scream," said Lockhart in a low voice. "It might provoke them." As the whole class held its breath, Lockhart whipped the cover off. "Yes," he said dramatically, "freshly caught Cornish pixies." Seamus Finnegan couldn't control himself. He let out a snort of laughter that even Lockhart couldn't mistake for a scream of terror. "Yes," he smiled at Seamus. "Well, they're not all very dangerous, are they?" Seamus choked. "Ah, don't be so sure," said Lockhart, wagging his finger around annoyingly at Seamus. "Devilish, tricky little blighters they can be." The pixies were electric blue and about 8 inches high, with pointed faces and voices so shrill it was like listening to a lot of budgies arguing. The moment the cover had been removed, they started jabbering and rocketing around, rattling the bars, and making bizarre faces at the people nearest them. Right then, Lockhart said loudly. "Let's see what you can make of them." And he opened the cage. It was a pandemonium. The pixies shot in every direction like rockets. 2 of them seized Neville by the ears and lifted him to the air. Several shot straight through the window, showering the back row with broken glass. The rest proceeded to wreck the classroom more effectively than rampaging Rhino. They grabbed the ink bottles, sprayed the class with them, shredded books and papers, tore pictures from the walls, upended the wastebaskets, grabbed bags and books and threw them out of smashed windows. Within minutes, half the class was sheltering under desks, and Neville was swinging from the iron chandelier in the ceiling. Come on now, round them up. Round them up. They're only pixies, Lockhart shouted. He rolled up his sleeves, brandished his wand, and bellowed, Pixque Pitrimoni, and he had absolutely no effect. One of the pixies seized his wand and threw it out of the window too. Lockhart gulped, dived under his own desk, narrowly avoiding being squashed by Neville, who fell a second later as the chandelier gave way. The bell rang, and there was a mad rush toward the exit. In a relative calm that followed, Lockhart straightened up, caught sight of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who were almost at the door, and said, Well, I asked you three just to nip the rest of them back in their cage. He swept past them and shut the door quickly behind them. Can you believe him? Roared Ron as one of the remaining pixies bit him painfully on the ear. He just wants to give us some hands-on experience, said Hermione, immobilizing 2 pixies at once with a clever freezing charm and stuffing them back in their cage. Hands-on, said Harry, who was trying to grab a pixie dancing out of reach with his tongue out. Hermione, he didn't have a clue what he was doing. Rubbish, said Hermione. You've read his books. Look at all those amazing things he's done. He says he's done, Ron muttered. Ooh, I have a feeling we're going to learn more about Gilderoy Lockhart. All right, that was chapter 6. I hope you enjoyed it. We will start chapter 7 tomorrow, Mud, Bloods, and Murmurs. And that's it. Have a wonderful day. Love you guys.